Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Virtual Village Hall Film Club. We're excited to be joined today by Olly Parker, director, and Billy Ivory, writer of The Great Escaper, which opens in cinemas on Friday, the 6th of October. We hope you've been enjoying the trailer that we've been playing this week with the wonderful lead actors Michael Caine and the late, great Glenda Jackson. Olly, Billy, welcome to the Virtual Village Hall Film Club, and thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure. Yes, lovely.
So, The Great Escaper is based on the real life story of Bernard Johnson, a Second World War veteran in his 90s who, back in 2014, captured news headlines by making an escape from his Sussex care home to travel to France and attend the 70th anniversary commemorations of the D-Day landings. It's seemingly a gentle tale of daring do, but actually packs a punch, doesn't it, with its vivid flashbacks to the horrors of the Normandy beaches. So, first question to you, Billy. How closely does the film depict the real life events of Bernie's Great Escape?
Well, it does. It sticks to the information that we have, which isn't actually a great deal. And we know he went off. He was living in a care home with his wife Renee, and he wanted to go to commemorations. He couldn't. The official trip was full, so he was told I've gone for a second. We can't accommodate you on the organised trip. And then he made his own way. And we know he made his way to France. We know he stayed in the place called the Cozy Hotel, and that he met another ex-serviceman over there. And we also know that there was a kind of, because nobody knew where he'd gone. So then a manhunt ensued because there were fears for his safety. And that then he reappeared. He was spotted finally, and it was made sure that he was safe, and he came back, and by which time he was a huge media celebrity. So the film, what the film does is it takes those facts, and we know a lot about him and we know a fair bit about his life outside of the army and when he came back to Brighton, and so outside of the Navy, I beg your pardon, services, and but then within that period of time, actually, in going across to France, being in Ouistreham and the celebrations, there's been room for me and Ol to manoeuvre.
Yes, yeah, and you kind of mentioned how much we do or don't know about Bernie's life. So Michael Caine and Glenda Jackson play just superbly Bernie and Renee in the film, married for 60 years. Bernie and Renee's story of enduring love from kind of wartime romance to old age, illness and frailty is told so beautifully. Olly, to you, what was it like working with these two veterans of stage and screen?
Well, it was wonderful. I mean, really, it was one of those things where I've worked with a few kind of well-known actors, and sometimes there's a bit of baggage that comes with them, or there's a lot of people will be protecting them, and you're conscious of the hierarchy in the system. But these two were both incredibly down to earth and very they were like real kind of old troopers. They came to work. They were incredibly pleasant, always on their lines, always absolutely kind of part of the team. So there was no kind of throwing their weight around. They were just so purely from a professional point of view, they were a delight. But actually, it was the personalities they brought that made it fabulous to work with them. There's Michael, who virtually retired. He came back because I think the part in Billy's script really drew him, and it is a fabulous part, and he's so well suited for it. As an old soldier himself, he just is, and a boy from Bermondsey. He's got he's got all the mischief and all the personality of Bernie Jordan himself, and so he really rose to that, and he just has this, whatever age he is, he's got the same kind of spirit and the same kind of charisma, which makes him endlessly watchable. You know, you just find he's very you want to know what's in his head, Michael. He's always done that. He's always been able to be entirely kind of inscrutable. Part of sometimes the magic of a movie star is that you want to know what they're thinking, and they won't always show you. So he was doing something very interesting here, where it was partly inscrutable, but also partly wide open and vulnerable, which I don't think people will have seen much from Michael Caine. The courage to take on this part, to show himself as an old man, and in all his frailty, was extremely actually inspiring. And we find with Glenda an absolute parallel here. You know, they hadn't worked together for about 47 years. They were in a film called The Romantic Englishwoman and played a married couple there too. And yet when they came together, they were really like old friends. And there's a lot of similarities between them. So there was this immediate kind of chemistry. And it wasn't they were deeply respectful, but weren't distant. You know, sometimes respect can be slightly chilly in a relationship, you know, over respectful. But here there was this, they both threw themselves into it. And I'm very interested talking particularly to their relatives, how these parts seem to connect with them both very personally. Glenda's family, who were at a screening the other day, was saying they'd never seen her so much herself. She's always herself, Glenda, in one way, because she's burning bright, this powerful, passionate creature. But she was full of little peccadillos, little bits of her personality, which popped out in this performance, which they were quite surprised to see. And there's Michael too, who in a way has, as I say, this kind of mystique, but also complete availability as an actor. And it's so important for the film that they bond. As far as I'm concerned, they're amazing together, or they certainly are in the film.
Yeah, definitely. It comes across, and it sounds like it must have been a lovely kind of atmosphere on set with them both as well.
Well, Michael said it's the happiest experience he's ever had. Some people might put it down to a failing memory, but I think he definitely seemed to have a lovely time and was always full of mischief on set, you know, always kind of cracking jokes and mucking about. So it was wonderful to watch the impact on the crew too, you know, many of whom were like a quarter of their age, really young people, kind of hadn't expected to see, as he was saying at the beginning, it could have been quite a sweet little old-fashioned film, but actually what Billy created in the script here is a very layered, powerful, large-scale story in terms of some of it's just in a care home, etc., but it breaks open and you're working on different levels where there's so much, where it's a war, it's about aging, it's about compassion, and it's a love story. And so there's so much of this, and that required a kind of commitment and an emotional commitment from the cast. And that came in shed loads. I mean, the passion that they poured into it was, you know, often in small spaces, you kind of go, wow. And it's just very authentic. And I think it chimed with the authenticity of the writing. That's what kind of takes a film up to a different level, is when the source is, you know, you're on sort of true ground, you know, and then they give it to the actors who are themselves amazingly connected to it, that suddenly you've got something a little golden, I hope.
Yeah. That's brilliant. There's different kind of stories portrayed in the film of different veterans. So obviously from Bernie's own D-Day experiences to his new friend Arthur's experiences, and Scott's experiences of modern day conflict. It's a bit of a reminder that for many, the trauma of war and, you know, in some cases survivor's guilt never fades. How important was it to you both to portray those kind of harsh realities of these men's and many men like them and their experiences?
Really?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was, you know, my father was, one of the things I was interested in was just the idea that PTSD, you know, it can take so many different forms, and also that generation, Bernie's generation, really didn't talk about things very much. But interestingly enough, I remember speaking to a friend of mine a few years ago who had fought in the Falklands War, and he was talking about the difference between those, because he said he'd been in in the Falklands, and then he was transported back on a Hercules transport plane, and he said, 15 hours, like however long it was, hours later, but within a day later, he'd nipped out to Sainsbury's. He was back in England, and he nipped out to Sainsbury's to go and buy some tea bags, whatever it was. And he just stopped as he was walking to the till, and he realised he saw in the mirror reflection in the shelf that he got sort of a bit of South Georgia on, a bit of the Falklands smeared, the dirt still on his face because he hadn't washed it off. And what was interesting, and he had subsequently some difficult times dealing with the trauma of the Falklands. And what was interesting was the difference between those men who were transported back on the planes and those who came back on the boats that took about 2 weeks to get back. And they started to talk about their experiences as they came back. And they decompressed slightly better. And subsequent to the Falklands War ending, the difference between those two groups has remained quite pronounced. And then, so extrapolating from that, and then going back to my dad's kind of generation, my dad he talked about the war in a very comic book kind of way, almost, battle action and the little commando comics that I used to read as a boy, until about 6 weeks before he died. And then he started talking about how afraid he was of being caught in the plane. He was a navigator with Lancaster's 50 Squadron, and he said the thing that scared him was getting burnt. He said, and also he started talking about how his brother, my Uncle Lawrence, was shot down and killed on a raid to Essen, and he started telling me about how much his big fear, he said, was, and he had a great faith. My dad, we're a Roman Catholic family, and Dad had a faith. But nevertheless, he said he just couldn't stop thinking about his mother, my grandmother. And he said, I thought if I die, he said, if now Lawrence is gone, if I go, it will destroy her. She won't cope with that. And he said that started to haunt him, the thought that his mother would have to, and he said he became obsessed with surviving as it was at that point, suddenly. He said, you always think it's going to happen to the other person. But then suddenly it was like, it can't happen to me, it can't happen to me. And once you start going, it can't happen to me, it can't happen to me, then it becomes terrifying. Anyway, to go back to Bernie, what was really important in the film was to say, here's this man, he's for 70 years carried these scars. There's this unconsummated part of their relationship, he and Reenie, because Reenie too was traumatized by the war. And then in Scott, the young lad that we see, and I think it's a terrific performance we get from, has got a huge amount not a lot of huge big scenes, but there are a couple of moments that are just, I think, Olly, and there's just such a sort of beautiful kind of fragility in what he does in those moments where you just see this boy who's 20, and you go, he's gonna combust, and of course Michael Caine's character Bernie, I don't want to spoil it for everybody, but Bernie very early on goes, I recognise that guy, not because he's out having fights or he's out being disruptive, right? He's going, I recognise that guy because he's the life and soul of the party. He's the one everybody loves. He's uber functional, and so it's important, for me to say, look, it doesn't change. Trauma, it's still there, and also we keep sending people off to war again. We never learn, and off they go. And I know that sometimes there are conflicts that are, it's interesting to think about the Second War and appeasement, and actually you go, if you fought the First World War, as those people who were involved in appeasement were, damn right you'd be wanting to find any bit of paper that you could wave that goes, we won't be doing that again. But of course it happens again and again. And I think that there's a serious message in the film about that, about what will it take.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Billy, for sharing all of that with us. And the message really comes across. And to another message. So I hope it's not a spoiler, but I don't think it is. I found the moment when Bernie and Arthur meet a group of German war veterans in a bar during the commemorations. It was just so moving. What significance do you think that encounter has to Bernie's story and the film's wider message? Is it?
Do you want to say that one, Ol?
Sure. Well, it's a pivotal moment, really, and we've met Bernie as a charming, good-natured soul with just a hint of prejudice, about the Germans, as you might do, in a sort of playful, jokey way. And there he goes across on this journey, a kind of odyssey, to revisit the place of his trauma, and he's having all sorts of internal questions. And then he bumps into this bunch of characters, old fellas in a bar, and he hears them talking, and that's clearly not English, and he discovers they're Germans, and he's kind of confused as to what's going on there, and we don't quite know how he's going to react. And he says, "Can I go and talk to them?" And he goes off and talks to them, and it's a beautiful scene, I think, in terms of the idea of it, and it plays to the heart of the film because there are very few words, but he meets an old fella who was on his beach in Normandy, but on the other side, and so there's just a connection between them. And in that moment, you see these old fellas who've both been carrying this thing, and it just amplifies the story, and within it is this deep empathy. And that's what I suppose is the wellspring of this story, with empathy. It's about learning to look again at people and not sort of judge them or separate them, but find the humanity, the shared humanity. And it's astonishingly impactful. The screenings I've been to, it's had quite an effect on people, and that was an amazing one to film, because you're always looking for a little bit of magic on the film if you find it, and you never know quite how it's going to happen. But Michael with these old fellas around that, and just seeing this kind of the space between them sort of almost dissolves, and so that was a corker to do, and a real pleasure, and you come away from it feeling a bit of goosebumps.
Yeah, it's for the viewers, I would have the tissues ready for that moment. Yeah, you have been warned, and that leads really nicely into a question we've had from one of our virtual villagers. I don't know, Olly, if you might have already answered this, but Millie has asked us a question for you both. What was your favourite scene to write and your favourite scene to direct, and did it change when you saw the finished film?
Billy, do you want to start?
Well, I mean, it's funny because it's really it's very weird when you write something, because you live with it for a couple of years in your head before you ever see it, and it's real, and you have relationships with. And I sit down in this very room. This is where I write, and I kind of get to know everybody, and then every morning I start, and they're real people to me, and then of course there's that process of handing it over, and then the actors come on board, and flesh become flesh, and sometimes that process can be quite tough, just from a writing point of view, because simply that you've imagined it differently. It's just, it's no more profound than that, and you kind of go, oh, okay. But what's been really, really interesting with this film has been the number of times where I've been that moment of things being slightly not different, but just not quite as you imagine them, and they've been better. They've been I think Olly and and Glenda and Michael and Johnny Standing and the younger actors as well. Just these moments where you kind of go, they've taken the DNA of a scene, and the thing that really, its heartbeat, and they've just got inside it, and then they've made it sing. And you know, for me, one of the scenes that I was really loved writing is one of the scenes with the younger Bernie and Reenie, when they go walking. They're at a dance, and Bernie knows he's about, you know, the D-Day landings are about to happen, and he says, I want to take to this place, and she says, yeah, you know, we'll go there. And you know, he's a city boy. He says to her, you know, till he'd been stationed, there's a lot, you know, the whole of the South Coast had become this marshalling yard. There were 150,000 servicemen, you know, gathering pre the D-Day along the South Coast, and you know, at that point, Bernie says to her, you know, while he's been there stationed there, you know, I'd never seen a haystack before I came here. He's a lad from London, and he's got to know a local farmer, and it's, you know, where I'm from Nottinghamshire, and there's always been here this big pull between the rural and you know, and the industrial, with the mines, and you know, and I remember as a younger man, I was a dustman, and I used to go, and we used to do a lot of pit villagers, but then in the evenings, a lot of the lads they'd take me out and they'd teach me how to tickle trout, and we go out and we learn how to flip try, you know, and it was this weird mixture of you know, and when I saw that scene, I loved writing it, and I got very, very firm ideas of how I thought it would be, and then I watched it, and there was a kind of, Olly had brought this kind of playfulness to it, and which, funny enough, somebody I was talking to the other day had seen it, and a young woman had seen it, interestingly enough, and it had really spoken to her, that scene of the, and she said, I just love the way she's in charge. And she said it's like a dance, and it is like a dance. It's like a ballet around the trees, and it all, and you know, and our cinematographer did an extraordinary job with it as well. And so it was, for me, that was the one which it was always one of my very, very favourites. And then when I saw it, I thought, blimey, that's really good. Not from my point of view, but from the point of view of what it was. I just thought, crikey, that's really brilliant.
We were lucky in that, answering that Millie-Anne question, you know, there were so many lovely things to remember. Filming is like that, but there were many in this thing, and some of them I think were quite surprising, like Glenda, in terms of actually slightly touching on Luke's question here too, because Glenda Jackson has a few scenes with Danielle Vitalis, who's playing a young care worker, and there's a sort of parallel relationship going on while Michael's out going to France and John Standing, Arthur and Bernie. Back home, this relationship develops between a care worker who's doesn't seem to care that much actually to start with, but as the story develops, she gets more kind of intrigued by this older woman and kind of amazed at the passion between Bernie and Reenie, and starts to see beneath the layers of skin and beneath the kind of front, because Glenda's character's got all sorts of armor to start with. She's very tough and funny, but not immediately warm. And then as the movie progresses, you get to a scene where, I won't give too much away, but basically young Adele, the care worker, begins to see what's really going on, and the connection between those two, the very understated writing, and then what you get with no writing again between them, where Glenda's face suddenly falls, and Adele gets what the thought is between them. Something happens, and then they sit on the bed together, and there's a hug, and it's very touching. And Adele's performance in that moment too was very surprising on the day. Wonderfully restrained actress, not, you know, imagine saying nearly all your scenes with Glenda Jackson, and coming in every day and doing the stuff, and was completely a match for it in terms of meeting her in the middle of those scenes. And so there were little moments like that were delicious. There was one also, Billy, when Michael was on the beach itself, when he's in France and he's walking with his stick and we were racing, slightly touching maybe on Victoria's one in terms of the pressure, time pressure. She's asking what was difficult and challenges. You know, the pressure of it was only 30 days, which is fast for a film, and with a cast like that, they're not moving as fast as they might, and you don't want them to either. So everything had to count, you know, and you're not waiting for them, you know, they do it again. But so that day, you know, literally, and you've got Chris, the DP, who's carrying this camera. We had a drone going overhead to catch everything at once as the sun was going down. So you've got almost no time, but you want to catch the sunset. And Michael, walking across the sand with his stick, and this kind of astonishing silhouette of him against the purpley sun, and the shadows across and reflection over the wet sand, was kind of, okay, we've got one take, let's get it. And everybody kind of pulled in to help, and so you could, when I watch it, I can still smell the bloody salty sea and and the soft sand, and Michael looking like a corner of Mount Rushmore with that profile. There's something kind of epic about it, and what you're always looking for in a film, especially a sort of little one, you know, it's quite a small scale film in some ways, is you're looking for it to have cinematic scale. And when you've got some of the storytelling like this, it allows you to, takes you from a care home into hopefully large spaces, both in the real world and in the real minds and hearts of the characters. And so, yeah, that was another great moment for me, another strong memory.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
Oh. Brilliant. Thank you both for sharing that. I'm looking forward to the virtual villagers all tuning in. I know it's a busy time for both of you with the film opening next Friday, so we'll let you go, but I've no doubt that The Great Escape is going to be a huge hit with the audiences. Thank you both so much for joining the film club today. It's just been lovely to chat with you both.
Likewise.
Lovely. Thank you very much. It's been great.
Oh, thanks so much. And virtual villagers, we'll look forward to seeing you again soon for another film club interview. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.